Watamote is an odd beast of an anime. In my Welcome to the NHK analysis, I had mentioned this in the nearest neighbour section, and it said that it's not really an apt comparison, and I stand by that. Watamote is, for better or worse, a cultural icon for a certain section of the internet. It shares an aesthetic and some basic themes with Welcome to the NHK, but the people who specifically like Watamote are a different breed. Unlike Welcome to the NHK, Watamote follows a character who, notably, is currently going through the high school experience and is failing. They are trying to be perceived favourably and doing a terrible job, as opposed to Sato in Welcome to the NHK who, in high school, tried his best to not be perceived at all. In this, and the gender divide between the two shows, we can elucidate some of the differences, the reasons I call it not too similar to Welcome to the NHK, and the reason for its popularity with a certain demographic of people. So, join me again as we depart from Ikuta and go to wherever Watamote is set. I'll try my best to keep this one short, because ultimately there isn't that much actually effable about the content inside Watamote, so largely this review will be in the style, motivations, and peripheral effect. Where my Welcome to NHK video was a historical archive and content analysis, this is going to be a lot more of a philosophical dissection. I'd like to preface this by stating that, largely, I enjoyed Watamote. I thought it was funny, gave me a healthy dose of cringe, and balanced the tedium of a school setting without too much irritation. Watamote, I would posit, is entertaining but has little to say. It's a show with a target audience which will relate to the main character, Tomoko, while also hoping to pack enough entertainment value to keep other viewers watching through the mode of eventually repetitive cringe humour. Considering its popularity in the time shortly after 2013, its time of airing, this approach was at least somewhat successful. So why then does it only have a 66% on AniList and a 6.99 on MyAnimeList? Obviously, these numbers do not tell the tale of an anime, and these sorts of aggregated scores are often incredibly misleading. But they do go to show something interesting. For a show with a cult following, and a core audience who relate to it so closely that there's a demographic who, for years, plastered Tomoko's face on everything, why are these scores so low? There's something to be learned about media, from the contrast between Watamote and things like Tatami Galaxy and Welcome to NHK, and I think it's found within what's ultimately the central thesis statement of this review channel, that introspective media is engaging. I would posit that Watamote isn't introspective. The goal isn't to reflect and reassess, instead aiming to reflect and comfort. Through the figure of Tomoko and the episodic nature of the show, the viewer gets to engage with the memories of their own life, or even their life's current events, from the safe distance of watching someone relatable also doing the things they do or did, as opposed to the other two named pieces of media, which are more around feeling yourself in the place of the characters and assessing what went wrong, or at least what you could do better, as we see Sato especially engaged with what went wrong in his life. This is not something we ever really get from Tomoko. She is largely unchanging throughout the duration of the show. The difference there is that one of them is accompanying the viewer through failure, and the other is shaking them by the shoulders, begging them to revolt against it. So this being said, what exactly is the character of Tomoko? Well, in short, Tomoko is a socially awkward, perverted, sleazy, lonely, fake human. Tomoko, much like Sato, has a personality they don to engage with the outside world. However, unlike Sato's self-indulgent apathy, they go as low as to cheat at card games against children to feed this persona. This, somehow, also ends in a positive. Consider the setup in virtually any other piece of introspective television. A character is caught, by the person they're trying to impress, cheating at Magic the Gathering to beat a bunch of actual children, and because the intention of the character was to impress that person, they get a good ending. That certainly wouldn't work for Sato, and further wouldn't work for David Brent. The negative action displayed isn't to be considered, it's to be noted and moved on from. It is an act of acceptance rather than introspection. Tomoko, therein, is a figure for the worst aspects of the viewer to be channeled into and dulled through being presented comically and relatively harmlessly. Tomoko isn't even really nice to her only real friend throughout the show, but those parts are all played for laughs or are turned around by her friend's continual kindness, still devoid of real negative consequences for Tomoko. There is lots of commentary on Tomoko's mental disorders online, and you'll often find a lot of this commentary around the possibility of her suffering from borderline personality disorder. This largely comes from the dissonant concepts held in tension within her. She simultaneously hates the popular girls and views them as lesser, but also wants to be one of them, with no ability to resolve or even recognize this dissonance internally. Further, she has a need to be the apex of events around her, at least to someone. When she hears that a classmate had been assaulted on public transport, she then makes up a similar event on call with her friend. She will, as prior stated, to attain the respect of actual children, cheat at a card game to avoid the ego catastrophe of losing even once. She also tries to craft the way she eats in class to build an image for herself, only to quietly embarrass herself in the process, Tomoko will lie about her station for the active positive perception, and will continue the lie to keep up that supply of respect. We can compare this to Sato, who, in high school, tried to be engaged with as little as possible, and then, in later life, would lie about his station to avoid having to be perceived by others. I think, though, the framing of Tomoko as having borderline is a little presumptuous. Not only because she is a sort of abstracted visage of personality traits for the purpose of creating a mirror character and is not a real, concrete human, but also because Tomoko's continual lack of success makes it quite evident that the plot is meant to just follow a failure bumbling through life as opposed to some deep psychological insight. There is a smaller contingent of people who, in this, relate to Tomoko through their own supposed borderline personality disorder, who you can witness posting her still to this very day, and caring about Bocchi the Rock's superseding of Watamote as the new hotness. To these people, I would like to say, stay winning, girl boss? So then, we may move on to the next question, of whether or not we have any solid takeaways from this show. What actually happens in Watamote? Well, nothing. Where Sato strives for a dramatic death, a purpose in his post-school life, Tomoko is just going through school. Where Welcome to the NHK asks, in an almost Camus sense, culminating primarily in the last episode, should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? Watamote just paints a picture of the absence of success in the moment, without touching on the continual and ongoing regret that spawns therein. It's a lot more palatable to people currently in the situation to see Tomoko's normal and pleasant friend talking to her normally, still seeing the humanity and value within her, than to have Misaki shout up at Sato on the cliff that he's worth less than a stray dog for being such a pathetic shut-in. The ending of Watamote even goes to show how unintrospective the show really is. So, why am I reviewing it? And the answer is the same as to why I'd review Sing yesterday for me, which is because it's so often put under the introspective umbrella. It's something I'd label safe introspection. It never really goes far enough to make the viewer really shook, like the NHK will thrust down your throat, but instead walks back any real, serious messaging on the precipice of those points. I do believe that in the manga, even, Tomoko does eventually make friends. In this, we can outline the difference in media which will cause you to think, haha, that's me, and, oh god, that's me. Which fundamentally defines an ontological gap between media which is escapist and media which is anti-escapist. This is well illustrated in the new and old Evangelion, for example. When someone says, I'm on my Sato arc, you know that person is in the trenches. It is openly a negative thing. But when someone changes their profile picture to Tomoko and starts karaoke posting, there's a more irreverent and let-it-rot feel to the endeavour, largely lacking in that will to betterment. In this, the cultural aspect of Watamote effectively comes down to gender-swapped Patrick Bateman posting. And let's be totally honest, Patrick Bateman posting is funny. But it is not lost on me that the movie American Psycho is a direct satire of Wall Street life, and is semi-auto-fictional, as a lot of the book was inspired by the author's real experiences with people who worked on Wall Street. Obviously with extra murder added in. Watamote is less of a satire and more of a comical observation of the way some people live. It doesn't really have much to say about the virtues, or lack thereof, of Tomoko's lifestyle, and seeks to rather portray a raw story, with the goal of being entertaining. I think this is a chosen styling, rather than accidental, as to really criticise Tomoko's personality traits and have some real consequences or discovery would alienate a lot of people who are going there for that literally me aspect. But that does limit its scope as an art piece, and ultimately, I'm not really here to judge how enjoyable things are. I'm here to be a snobby art critic. How enjoyable something is entirely subjective, but quality is something less so. Sure, it is still somewhat subjective, but a poorly made nail is still worse than a well-made one. And if you've ever perused Archive of Our Own, we can stop pretending there's no such thing as good or bad storytelling too. So, with all this being said, I sound like a real hater. However, I, on my Annie list, rated this show as 6.1. I found it enjoyable. I think the opening music for the show is really good. I find the moments of interaction with her brother enjoyable, but oddly, it is in those moments a big flaw emerges. The show is so unintrospective that as much as the show frames the cringe as from Tomoko, in those moments, the cringe has basically no impact on her life, but negatively impacts the life of the people around her. Her looks maxing in the restaurant when she runs into her brother's friends could only really cause awkwardness for her brother, as she doesn't have to see or be around his friends. Her odd looking down on her friend leads to a lot of moments which could have negative outcomes. For example, lying to someone about having been sexually assaulted for an inflated image of sexuality could lead to several adverse outcomes if that person had sought outside help for your situation. She is openly caught lying to her cousin and has a simple apology to the boy she falsely claimed to be dating, implying him to be cheating on her, and even this is resolved for her with incredible ease. The boy is already dating someone, so she had no hope there to begin with, so no loss. And with her cousin, simply cheating at MTG managed to somehow resurrect her image. If any of these moments had definitively made Tomoko's life worse, if they had had any real consequences, it would have been a really interesting piece of good introspective fiction. As I said earlier, this channel was inspired by my open love of introspective shows. Things which make you think about the personal, effective questions which can affect your own everyday. And Watamote comes so close and misses intentionally. Reaching the end of Watamote and struggling through the extra episode felt like, and excuse the turn of phrase, being edged for 300 minutes of content without any trace of real commentary and coming up empty-handed. Ultimately, because of this, Watamote is a really frustrating show to watch coming off the recommendations on things like Welcome to NHK. It feels artificially hamstrung for the sake of marketability. Imagine if David Brent kept winning inexplainably in The Office UK. It would feel wrong. It's honestly quite heartbreaking to come away from a show like this with the lasting impression simply being, damn, I wish it had been better.